Aye.
All opposed? Yes. In a related meeting minutes issue, I also sent each of you a detailed public hearing. On October 11th, we had a public hearing to repeal the ordinance. And I went back and this is not the exact. But I sent this to you guys. Go back. Anyway, this is a detailed order minutes of the public hearing portion with the comments from everybody. And I would like to add this as a supplement to the October 11th meeting minutes. So if you guys have had a chance to look at it previously, then a reasonable representation of what happened.
Well, I read this before, and that I didn't read it, but do you formally attach it to the minutes or how?
Yeah, yes, we can attach it as a supplement to the meeting minutes. Okay, any other comments? I'd like to make a motion that we approve the October 11th public hearing meeting minutes as a supplement to the October 11th meeting minutes that were approved at the November 1st meeting. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any questions? All in favor of approving this as a supplement? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. I will also send this to the township board so they can attach it to the motion that the recommendation that I sent.
Right.
So. Okay. Correspondence. Numerous email correspondence on setbacks, and that basically setbacks have warned us about setting a precedence for allowing people to waive setback requirements. We'll talk about that later. And also an email that basically said that they were concerned that you were doing things such as making the screening for the trees per direction from Apex, and because of the cost or whatever, expense of putting in thousands of trees. And I just want to mention that we do not take cost into consideration. Let's see what else. We also received a email that basically there was a discussion among various township officials from other townships that talk about do I work for the township board or the residents? In other words, these were planning commission people, and I concur with the commentary in that we are employees of the township board. However, we are to work for in the interest of the citizens and the residents, in order to help them navigate the process of getting things done at the township level. And then there was also a article that I received that basically says It was a big article called "It's Not Nasty, the Battle to Build the U.S. Biggest Solar Power Farm." And, in Indiana, I believe it is. So these things I will see if I can get them posted to the website. Okay, township board member, anything going on with the township board?
There is a meeting tomorrow night here at 7 o'clock for the township board.
Anything of interest on the agenda? Thank you, you can go, such as?
I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting things. I don't have the agenda here with me.
All right. I believe the agenda is on the website, so if anybody's interested. Yes,
Was there a discussion about interviews? Or about the planner, or what's the, is that the vote, is the vote?
I would hope to select a planner tomorrow.
When are the supervisory interviews starting?
We may do that too.
okay. Well, we're at that time, right, public comment, 2 minutes per person. Yes, ma'am. We have a microphone ready.
I don't.
Sorry.
Good evening, my name is Erica Shell, and I represent many homeowners in the Milan area who are extremely concerned about the solar ordinance revision process that this planning commission is currently engaged in. There are 2 issues that I want to bring to your attention tonight. The first of those is that given that the interviews for a planner are expected to begin tomorrow, it's completely impossible that there will be a completed ordinance ready before the moratorium is set to expire in January of 2023. I defer to your township attorney's advice, but it puts the residents in an extremely precarious position to allow that moratorium to expire without adequate protection. And as you noted, it is this commission's duty to help the residents make sure that their interests are followed by the township board. The second point I wanted to raise for you all tonight is that the ordinance that you consider with your planner, there have been numerous meetings about this where the community has very strongly emphasized that solar AG1 and AG2 districts in the township. And I strongly encourage this board to make sure that whatever planner is engaged is acting in accordance with the township residents' desires and what they have requested of this commission. Thank you.
Regarding the moratorium, if the moratorium expires and it's not renewed, currently we do still have an ordinance in place that will protect the township. If that ordinance is rescinded, well then we would not have any protection if the moratorium is not extended.
Right, so I defer to the township attorney on this point, but if the moratorium were to expire, it's my understanding that the current ordinance would allow for solar in AG1 and AG2. And so that would leave the folks who are very concerned about AG1 and AG2 districts being abused by this solar use completely without the protection that they're seeking from a revised ordinance.
Well, we will be discussing that probably at our next meeting. Districts that we may amend it, we may not, I don't know, but we will be discussing which districts we want to amend for ordinance.
And given the timing of the planning interview, it would make sense for this commission to recommend tomorrow at the board meeting that there would be an extension of that moratorium to allow this commission to do its job with the planner and go about that process in order with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. This is a first. Okay. Okay, 7:13, we'd like to open up the public hearing to obtain comments regarding revising the Milan Township zoning orders, Article 5, table of permitted uses to allow campgrounds in C1 and C2, and ending of Article 13.07. In your deck, you should have, first of all, the cover page is the notice that was put in the paper and on the website for these two public hearings that we're about to have. And the next item in the paper clip deck is the application that we use for amending the ordinance. Followed by the second page is a list of facts or conditions, and which I will go through. But which I'll go through now. Milan Planning Commission, I'm reading from page 2 of the application.
The first one, or
The first one, yes, Article 5. The Milan Township Planning Commission held a public hearing on November 9th, 2022, to receive public comment on the above request to modify Article 5 and Article 13.07. Whereas campgrounds are currently only allowed in the A1 zoning district. Whereas currently we have a 49-acre recreational facility that has been in operation since the mid-1960s and is located in the C1 zoning district. Whereas this facility has requested that camping be allowed at this location. Whereas camping would be a natural addition to the services offered by this facility. Whereas a special use, as a special use, the township would be able to add any additional requirements that may be necessary either now or in the future. Whereas per 13.07.3F, camping is also regulated by the state of Michigan. Whereas in 13.07.1B, the zoning board of appeals is the only body authorized to approve changes in hours of operation. Whereas the township board, instead of the zoning board of appeals, should be the body to add or modify any of the conditions contained in this article. Therefore, it is recommended that in Article 5, table of permitted uses, campgrounds should be allowed as a special use in C1 and C2 zoning districts, and as restricted per Article 13.07. Therefore, it is recommended that the township board should approve changes per 13.07.1B in place of the zoning. Okay. It is recommended that the township board should approve changes per 13.07.1B in place of the zoning board of appeals. Therefore, it is recommended to add a new statement as 13.07.1C. Quote, as part of the recreation facilities special use approval, the township board may add and modify any of the conditions contained in this article. Therefore, upon the motion duly made and approved on November 9th, 2022, the Milan Township Planning Commission recommends approval to the Milan Township Board of the above zoning changes in Article 5 and of the process and text changes to Article 13.07 Milan Township Code Ordinance 2018. Okay. Is there any public comment on that? Yes, go ahead.
Am I understanding this correctly, that campgrounds can go in any C1 or C2 or only the lake? Only the beach? I have no problem with it at the beach. Well, is it gonna be allowed anywhere in C1 or C2?
It would be, as long as it has more than 30 acres.
So,
And as long as the township board would approve the special use
That's good.
So all of commercial along Sanford and Ann Arbor, in theory, a campground could come in there and you're gonna waste perfectly good commercial property where a Target or gas station or whatever could go in, it would be much more profitable. You're gonna waste that on a campground?
As a, if we designate it as a special approval use, the township board could make that decision to allow that, or not allow it.
Why, what would stop the plant, the board from okaying it if it's already allowed?
They would have to decide that there was an appropriate place to put it, wherever it is being proposed. First of all, there would have to be at least 30 acres. And yes, there are a number of places that are 30 acres in our commercial, but not that many. So, like I said, in the township board would have, we could designate that, or rule that they would not want it for various reasons. Yes,
You're
sir.
gonna stop that entity from suing, saying, well, you can allow it here, you don't like me, so you're not gonna let me put it here?
Yes.
Plan order, on two things, I think we talked about the public hearings, can we, make sure that we're, recording name and address, of the folks that are,
Yes,
speaking, I can't talk.
yes.
And then the other one is that if this is a public hearing, with a point of order, that it's a public hearing and not a discussion back and forth. No,
I guess I don't understand,
Thank you.
I guess I don't understand what.
She's
She's saying
basically,
we can't ask questions? What's that?
well, they can ask questions, and it's up to us to, we have.
We can ask
we have-
questions, but I guess from the point of order, from a standpoint of a public hearing, is testimony. Only,
Okay,
is that how, I mean, I don't know, we have an attorney here, because I don't wanna. I don't wanna be rude, but 1 minute we say we can't, and then the other minute we are, so I just wanna. Try to provide some consistency. In what we do, because I could be wrong, but, from what I know. I don't know, so I guess we could ask, Marty,
Marty is,
all right,
dialogue back and forth, turning to this public comment. Loud,
It would not be appropriate. This is the time for public comment, not public comment, but public hearing. Similar to public comment, the citizens are able to make their comments and provide their, if they want to ask questions, don't expect them to be answered. This is not an exchange of ideas or debate. We want to hear the comments, and the planning commission can take them into account when they're deliberating an action.
thank you.
Okay, I revise my statement. I think it's a very poor idea to put camping in C1 and C2 along Sanford Road and Ann Arbor Road. I think it would be a total waste of good commercial property. Thank you.
Thank you, Red. Any other comment? Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Your name?
Tom connects. Yeah. And, on this, Panther thing, I'd like to hear someone that knows something about it first of all, instead of making a decision. One, because are they gonna have septic? Are they gonna have fill up water? Are they gonna, how many sites they're gonna have in 30 acres? If that's an open-end thing, then I want to, I got some property I want to put in camp too, I'll make some money too, so. There should be, you on the planning committee should be asking those questions, or asking that person that's doing the camping, if and how many, and is there septic, before they just run a hole down the road when they can take off. Water, so there's a lot of things that should be asked and brought to the people, so that we can probably talk really good about it and say, yeah, there's 20 sites, there's a certain size of sites, they gotta be for 33 footer, 38 footer, so on and so forth. There's electric, there's water, there's sewage. Those are the kind of things, I just, you give them it's like, we're gonna have a mess, or townships gonna have a mess, because I figured then, we'll township have a township. So, Because we're making decisions like this, so that's the kind of stuff I like to hear. If we come to these meetings, we're gonna talk about amendments and all the stuff, and what ordinance we got. It shouldn't be moved until if I was doing it, I'd be at that mic saying, I wanna do 30 campgrounds tonight, I'm putting 110, 220 in, and generators and so on and so forth, and sewer units and so on. So the people behind me would know what's going in on that corner. And right now, it's making it open-ended, you can do anything you want with it. So, I think it would be in the best interest of the board, both boards, that they would have that information, have the person here that wants to do it. Well, he's part of the township. And have them ask your questions, or you gotta answer the question, but just to give it out and say, yeah, we'll change this, make it to where they make it campground, I'm dead against it. Dead against it. You don't operate business like that. Ask your lawyer, if he ever gets into anything like that in a business sense, I don't think you let that business person do that in here. So that's my 2 cents and my 2 minutes of word.
Thank you.
So you don't have to respond to the gentleman. Would that not, or would it be part of the site plan review?
It would be part of the site plan review as well as a special use review. Both of those would require detailed information of whoever would want to put a campground in that. But yes,
And we can unilaterally, we can say 50 sites is too much. We do not want in-ground septic tanks. I mean, whatever, we can go through the ins and outs of the site plan specifically and limit the number of sites, limit the infrastructure on the property, make sure there's not open sewage pits, things like that.
But that's exactly what I'm saying, sir.
I know, I'm just verifying that.
It's a part of, automatically change it, that it's open-ended. I don't like open-ended handout.
there's a extensive state of Michigan requirements for campgrounds that they have to meet if they have, as well as, so, and yes, we can,
But
specify that.
there are controls in place, and that although camping by the language in the ordinance would be allowed, it could be easily regulated through the site plan process.
As long as it could be regulated, as long as, yes, they, provide that they meet all the requirements of the site of the ordinance.
And just to kind of address another concern. What would be the process right now of, is there any way to allow camping or further recreational use not otherwise spelled out in the current ordinance 4C1 that we could apply to just the beach property? What that process would be?
I don't know, I'd have to consult with our planner and our attorney. If we want to try to figure out some other alternative designation.
We can all hear that, we've been doing this a long time, and if we weren't considering this particular ordinance right now, and we wanted to allow whomever owned the beach at this time to have camping, or otherwise, maybe not specifically stated recreational uses in there. We don't know all the how we go up in that.
Well, the reason why he wants camping. And the reason why he's not allowed that camping is because we have a designation on your campground in the ag one only just. So that, and he's in seawater. Now, one of the alternatives is we could remove campgrounds from permitted use in Milan Township. But then that has issues of its own. Yes, sir.
I just want to be consistent in my sass tonight, but point, I think that from a public hearing standpoint, if we're gonna be doing this from a process of,
We should be.
Standard. yes, listen to everybody and then bring it to discussion.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, yes, sir.
Milan Township. Is this gonna be seasonal camping? Are you guys considering that, or is it gonna be like the state ag park where you only have to stay 2 weeks and you gotta move on someplace else? Is this year round? Some campgrounds do year round, some campgrounds only do seasonal from April till November or October, end of October. These are all things that I'm concerned about, and like Tom said there, how many lots are you considering? I mean, the 30-acre parcel over there, if I'm not mistaken. It's not a whole lot of ground. And one other last thing is, you don't want, excuse my language for this, you don't want riffraff coming in there in a 1960s camper and setting up camp and you can't get out of there 2 weeks after he's in there, because it won't start, it won't move. I mean, it's something, you know, I know some campgrounds won't allow anything older than 20 years in a campground. Is that something you guys would consider as well?
Can they leave anytime, too, as in, is there time limit?
Is there, I'll get it there. Is there certain hours that this would be in and out? I mean, most campgrounds, well, I know one in Ida, you can run in and out all night long. Is that something you guys need to think about as well, I guess?
Yes, we will. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, sir. Back there.
Yeah, well, so I've done a lot of my concerns with some campgrounds that I visit. There's blight as far as campers they're too long. I've been ones where they're abandoned, ones that aren't being addressed. One example is full of bees. Now, so my concern is make sure that there's some kind of, I heard comment about your people rehab 1960s, I have no problem. But it's better reaching blight or such, that's my concern. Campground. Maybe some kind of enforceable. By the township. To keep it into
Yes. We'll discuss that later. Yes, yes, ma'am.
I would like to know or express
Hey,
Kim Roney, Negro. I would just like to express a concern that, by giving people sort of a pseudo residence for a short period of time of camping, and I'm a camper, so I try to say this without too much judgment. Given that the access to the highway and that campground, it really sets up a potential nuisance for drug sales. And I'd like to know what the township plans to do to make sure that that doesn't happen, because I can tell you that that's an issue in the general area. And it could become a problem.
thank you.
It's something to consider.
Sharon, you have a question?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Bill Plum, Milan Township. Most of these things of the addresses too, I think have kind of been covered, but maybe not as succinctly. I realize that Getaway Bay has changed hands several times in the last couple of years. Unfortunately, I've also noticed that the property has progressively become more and more in disarray. If it's not trash and rubbish, it certainly appears to be. And the collection is growing both from Cone Road view and access, and certainly from the view now from 23. Again, I'm certainly all for a person's property rights to develop the property to its fullest potential. But it has to be done, of course, within proper guidelines, community standards, etc. And it does leave this particular person in front of you concerned when it's again progressively gotten more disarray and disheveled over the last couple of years. And now we're looking at expanding greatly its use and operation. Leaves me quite concerned. Likewise, one of the other concerns that I have is the tendency of the people camping there. Not to pick on them, but they're a great example. The motorcycle club that is on Petersburg Road. Several years ago, out of nowhere, a couple of campers appeared. And through the last several years, now it's somewhere around a dozen RVs are on that property. And they stay there for the most part year round. Obviously, they're not being used in the winter months, they're being stored in the winter months. So I would hope that this board thoroughly examines all of the uses, and there's obviously models that you can look at that are currently in the township. And I've not heard the one I just brought up about the motorcycle club mentioned yet. But again, I hope you take all of this input and heard some very good concerns and leave them at your feet.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, there's something. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much. So now I will close the public hearing. And we will have a discussion among the board members, planning commission members. Okay, now, what I read earlier, like I said, it was a number of statements that I put together. It's for I sent this to you later. If you want this to, I fully expect this to be edited or is it added to it? Does anybody have any questions about adding campgrounds as C1 and C2?
So as a part of we close the public hearing.
Yes.
Is the applicant was he or she informed of this evening?
Yes,
She's online.
No. he was gonna be, but he's not yet.
Oh, okay, thank you. But at this time, this only affects in terms of whether it's allowed or not allowed. At a later date, we will have a public hearing to review these special use approval for his request for campgrounds or camping.
So you're saying we're gonna have another meeting on it?
Correct. At a later date, this is basically to establish whether campgrounds can be put in C1 and C2, irregardless of who it is. And then at a later date, we getaway day, we'll have a public hearing to actually discuss the details. Like you were asking about the very precise details, that was being asked by Tim and yourself and others, for how he's going to operate, when, and the plans, and we'll have to provide a site plan as well to basically show us exactly what he wants to do, plumbing, camping sites, what type. Because at one point, now, like I said, at one point he said just 5, because that's a magic number for the state of Michigan, and then the 10 only. Now, whether that's still in his anticipation, I don't know. He'll tell us, at the later date. So.
We can go to a later date.
So anyway, does that answer your question, Rebecca?
My question was just, I'm just curious if someone wants to add camping, I would just like to hear from them. Then, I don't think it's too much to add.
John,
Yes, Marty,
If you would like, I can make a couple comments.
thank you.
You've got a section here. Private recreation, Article 1307,
Yes,
which talks about the requirements and guidelines for a campground, travel trailer park, and tent site regulation. This would be the spot to address all of the comments you're hearing tonight if you're inclined to take them up, and if you think they're well-based, this would be where you would put those things, such as can't stay longer than a certain length of time, or it's not for winter storage, or it does say no retail sales. It does say all sanitary facilities shall be designed and constructed with respect to health department regulations. Campground shall be licensed by the state of Michigan, so the state of Michigan has oversight. So if you want to add some language and some requirements, this is where you should do it. Because if an applicant for special approval comes in and it's a permitted use subject to special approval, and if they meet all the criteria, the township must approve it because they meet all your standards and criteria. So don't think that you have discretion if you don't like what they're proposing. Certainly, they'd have to submit a site plan. They'd have to submit a special approval narrative and things like that, saying how they're not going to have impact to the community and a bunch of discretionary review terms. But if you want more criteria for camping, this would be the place to put it in paragraph 3 under Article 1307, private recreation. Then the separate section of the ordinance is the special approval procedures and criteria. That indicates that the township board presently must have a public hearing and evaluate the proposal as to whether what impact it has on the community, no detrimental effects, things like that. There's a whole laundry list of criteria, which are a bit vague. But again, if the applicant meets and satisfies all the criteria, the township can't just use flat out discretion to deny it. So if you want to limit the amount of campers, I hesitate to say that that's allowable, because where are you pulling a number from? What's the rational basis for how many is too many? Is it 5? Is it 10? Or maybe you'd rather say something so many per acre, or so many per developable acre, something like that, you know, and relate it to the size of the parcel. So they just can't cram them on. So I guess I just want to make it clear that the township board does not have just flat discretion if they meet all the criteria that the township establishes in their ordinance. So this is the time to spruce that up if you're inclined. So you have some better regulations.
Thank you very much.
Marty, real quick, when you, for everyone's benefit, and mine included, you said that if they met all the criteria, that we would not be allowed to deny the special approval. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Then, again, just for my benefit, maybe, and what's the difference between special approval and permitted use?
Permitted use means that it is flat out allowed. For example, single family residential in an ag zoning district or residential zoning district is a permitted use. They do not have to seek special approval from the township. They do not have to submit plans or a narrative. They do not have to satisfy all of the community impact type discretions for approval of that.
Okay, but they still have to follow all the language in our ordinances that are written.
A permitted use?
Yeah.
Of course, yes. But it wouldn't be special approval because it's simply a permitted use. It's different when it's a permitted use subject to special approval.
And that's a good.
So what kind of discretion do we have in it? If I, like, I'm looking at this, like, a commercial kennel is a special use in ag 1 and ag 2. If I meet all the criteria for kennel and I come and apply, what discretion does this commission or the board have in perhaps denying or accepting them?
Well, the planning commission, if you change the ordinance, will have the obligation to hold a public hearing like you're having right now to hear the public's comments. The planning commission will review the proposed use to see how it complies with all of the community standards and special approval ordinance that you have, and make a recommendation to the township board for approval or denial. But again, I caution, if they meet all the standards, it's going to be hard pressed to deny.
there's not much discretion there. If they meet it, they meet it.
Right, if they have satisfied all the criteria that you placed in front of them, then your intent is that they can have a campground.
Okay. So I gotta ask the question. You've answered a lot of the questions. I appreciate everything you had to say. But the first thing is what we're doing here, and I gotta ask the question. It's special if they're in Zone C or something like that, or whatever. You have to ask it special, and then we got okay it's special. If we can take that out and make that A, then they can just go ahead and do it. Is that the way I'm understanding it? Search, maps, so all I'm trying to do is understand what you guys just got done talking about.
Okay, any other comments?
So I guess I would just say that if we can communicate with the applicant, I realize this is, simply us reviewing the ordinance, to allow for it, so it's not necessarily in our application, but, we do know that it's surrounding one particular, interest level, and it would be helpful to know intent, interest, or to ask questions about, capacity, and then also just to get a sense of the last time we heard from them, I think was earlier this year, about the state of Michigan application that they were going to move forward with, and it would be nice to know feedback on that.
Yes, it would be nice. However, we also have to assume that somebody else might want to, in the future, come in and put a campground. And see what the C2 district.
But we were prompted with a map of what there's an interest level in doing it. So if there's a map, we can assume there's an interest from one particular individual. So yes, I agree with you that moving forward, but you know, some of these questions and some of this would be nice to know.
Any other? From Planning Commission.
It's not so much a question, it's saying. If I, Marty, please correct me if I'm wrong. If I understood him right, in there was kind of a suggestion to codify some of those concerns in paragraph 3 of the 1307. That perhaps we should think about, and again, I've heard some concerns tonight, and Marty specifically, you know, lots or sites per acre, lots of sites per usable acre. This is something that I think makes a lot of sense, and to codify it, we would recommend doing so. And I would like some time to, because I have all kinds of time, research more about campgrounds and how to best regulate them, so that we could perhaps specifically in paragraph 3 codify some of them. And this is not the first time we've had this discussion. But now, if not, I was always kind of assuming that perhaps we would handle that the site plan review, and I really like the idea of putting it in the ordinance itself, so that we don't have to, that our concerns are codified, and that they would not seem arbitrary as site plan review.
Okay. I mean, I don't disagree with you. In fact, I do agree with you. And so we should possibly explore some of these issues to make sure that they are nailed down, so that we don't end up with unintended consequences.
John,
Yes,
Mr. Carey's on now if you had questions.
my friend.
Mr. Carey's on now if you had questions.
We would have to open up a public hearing again.
Okay,
And
Probably is, as he's just, you know, he's a public. Okay, What I'd like to do is recommend that we table this until our next meeting, in which we can have some proposals. I want to add to section 1307. One of the just to back up, I in Article 1307, section 1. The zoning board of appeals currently is required is the body that would allow for changes of hours of operation, and township board should be the one to decide that, not the zoning board of appeals, my estimation. Also, I would
Would they assign those hours through us? Changing 1307 paragraph 1 part B as a part of our normal recommending duties.
yes, they could do that as part of the special use approval.
No, I mean, if we're gonna go back and revisit paragraph 3, would we go back and make those changes that you have underlined here in paragraph 1?
Well, I'm just basically bringing it up so that we all, talk about them, review them. And like number C that I want to add is to basically allow the township board to add or modify any of the conditions contained in this article. So.
Okay, well, again, I'll ask the attorney, that sounds weird to me. Is
that too broad?
Well, you're basically saying that here's our ordinance, but the board can just modify it, whatever they want. It sounds like to me.
I would prefer that you settle on the terms and conditions in your ordinance and not provide a body like the township board to vary your ordinance. I don't think variance by any body of the township other than the Board of Zoning Appeals is provided for by the Board of Zoning, by the Enabling Act. That specifically provides for the Board of Zoning Appeals to approve a variance with, once they find that there's practical difficulties. So if you set a standard, you should comply with it unless there's a unique practical difficulty and the Board of Zoning Appeals determines that and approves a variance. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you, and I agree, and I think that section C should be deleted. It's the bad, like you said, the bad. As Marty. Okay, and getting back to the suggestion that I'd like to table this so that we can at our next meeting have a discussion of items that to add to 1307.3 in order to make sure that we are have taken care of the concerns that have been expressed here tonight. Is there any objection to that? Very good. Okay.
Make the motion. Yeah.
So I make a motion that that we will consider changes to 13.07 and Article 5 at our next meeting, which I believe was November 22nd. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Matt. All in favor? Say aye. No opposed? Very good. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
Point of clarification. I thought our next meeting was December.
Well,
I thought that was, because I don't know. Why I'm not over there.
so Matt will be here Thanksgiving week.
If you can convince my wife that I will get a planning commission meeting on her 25th wedding anniversary. Don't ask me why I got married in the middle of gun season.
Okay. Well, then okay, then I'd like to make our next meeting December 6th. That's, the first Tuesday yes, it's the first Tuesday of December. Is there any problems with December 6th? Not yet. Okay, very good. Yeah, I'd like to open up, the next item is the public hearing for discussed, changes to the special use approval article section of our ordinances. 753. Public hearing to obtain public comments regarding the text and process changes to Milan Township zoning ordinance Article 10 special use approval. Currently, the ordinance provides that the township board is responsible for all the aspects of conducting the public hearings, finding of fact, and all the legwork that is necessary for special use approvals. And in the past, or in other situations like similar to this, the township, the planning commission, and usually has always done that type of work, as well as in other townships throughout Michigan. The planning commission is tasked with that work responsibility. So what I'm proposing is that wherever the township board is listed as being the entity to do something in terms of the public hearing or the preliminary reviews, the planning commission should be designated. And then, in addition, I'd like to add a section under procedures, basically, where it says that the planning commission shall formulate a statement of finding and conclusions relative to a special land use, which specifies the basis for any conditions imposed. The planning commission will make a recommendation to approve the special land use to the township board. So, that basically describes what the planning commission is supposed to do with the township board. And there's a few other changes to reference where there's a reference from special use of special approval use should be actually referred to as special use approval, which is the title of the article. So I'm opening this up to public comment. Anybody have any comments?
I'm confused as hell what you just said.
Okay, I will explain it again, which is, they have been not clear enough. In the zoning ordinances, we have a section that basically discusses the procedures and requirements for the standards for special use approval. That's where things like all these uses that are listed in the table of permitted uses under special use would have to satisfy the conditions in this part of the ordinance. And right now, the township board this requires the township board to do all the work. And they prefer to have us do all the work. And then just hand it off to them, the rubber stamp it, more or less. All I'm proposing is to change the procedures for conducting the special use approval process from having the township board do it to have the planning commission do it. That's basically what all this does. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer. So, yes, Tim.
Tim still in Milan Township. I would leave it as is with everything you guys got in the plate right now. I like you guys, but I don't believe you guys need to add any more to your plate.
Well, this would, I don't disagree with you in that respect. But generally, the process that is recommended by planners is that the planning commission, not the township boards, do this type of work. So any other comments? Thank you. So I'm going to close the public hearing at 7:58. Hey, you guys, planning commission, yeah, Pat.
Okay, item 5 that you had here, the last sentence,
Yeah,
is recommendation to approve the special land use to the township board. Line 6, you have all the land use crossed out, the word land.
oh, right. I didn't notice.
Okay, I just,
I didn't notice the word land in those stuff. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just a reminder, we talked about this before, but I'm not recalling, what prompted this, just the John Shower review of the zoning or?
Yes, when, basically when the campground reared its head, and his request for a special use approval, that prompted me to look at this, and then I also, in conjunction with what would be happening on the solar project, I realized that and one of the board members also realized that that they would have the planning commission do all the work, basic work, and then hand it off to them. And then sorry. I was also able to ask a planner about this and pro bono. And it was commented that yes, the planning commission is typically, it's not always the one that does the legwork. Any other questions? Yes, Marty.
I have one observation with your proposed paragraph 5. The last sentence says the planning commission will make a recommendation to approve the special land use to the township board. The way that reads it, it seems to mandate that you must give a recommendation of approval. I would rather you just say, we'll recommend, we'll give a recommendation regarding the special land use to the township board, whether it be in favor or against.
Thank you. Planning commission will make a recommendation regarding the special use to the township board. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Can you remind me when the last time we had a special use application?
You would ask me that, wouldn't you? Let's see, I've been working here for many years. I can't remember a single time that the township board has had a special use. They must have had it over the last 30 years, something, but I don't remember it ever coming up.
I've been here not as long as you, but a while, and I couldn't, I was just curious.
Any other questions? You know, what I'd like to do is make a motion that we make the changes that have been suggested to this article, and
I'm sorry, we just walked through 10.1,
okay.
but on the back of 10.2, where there appears to be a lot of, or some things as well. Is that something we need to?
10.2 was, it's going to get changing township board to planning for the 2 spots.
Okay.
That's the, and,
Crossing out lanes. Okay.
and, oh, I'm sorry, in item number 6, at the bottom of the page. I added that the township board or the planning commission may require impact studies in order to determine environmental, economic, traffic, or other effects.
Where it said it was amended on January 12, 2012.
Correct. That we had a lot of mistake at that time. Because so we were concerned that we wanted to be able to require the studies. We wanted to, it was suggested that planning commission should also be able to require those types of studies. Okay, Brent?
That section of what you just said is not brought up in your public hearing.
It was on the paperwork that was available.
I understand that.
So I'd like to make a motion that we approve, recommend these changes to the township board. To amend zoning ordinance. To add and change these, to make the changes as detailed here and.
I'll second that.
Real quick, so just as a, from a process standpoint, since this was posted, if I recall, to our website on November 9th, all of this information. I'm just checking to see because what.
It was posted at the time that the notice went into the paper, whichever that was.
I think in the process, I wouldn't be opposed to this laying over for till the next meeting, just to, there tends to be a bit, this is the actual official public hearing, whereas before we kind of, it wasn't posted as a public hearing, so that it, I really have no issues with this whatsoever, but since I'm on a process kit.
So,
I just wonder if, for consistency purposes, if it lays over to the next hearing.
to do what?
For approval. To allow more additional comment. Because this was not posted online.
Yes, it was.
Oh, I thought you just said it wasn't.
Yes, it was. When the notice went in the paper on the 15th of, I believe it was the 15th of October, I think. Wrong number, particular date.
The 10:01, I didn't see it online. I saw the notice was online.
At the township hall and on the website it was posted.
And 10.2 is posted or as well.
The whole thing. Is there,
Marty, can I have a question? Sure. Since Marty's here and we're using this night, from a public hearing standpoint, can you have a public hearing on a proposal and then vote on it in the same evening, or does there have to be a layover?
Yes, that's the usual course, though it's fresh in everybody's mind. Hearing the public comment and hearing the discussion here. So normally, you
Then
take up
vote on it then?
deliberation and normally you vote on it, but sometimes there's reason to step back and maybe you want to have the actual amending ordinance drafted so you can see it and hold it in your hand. The way it's been tentatively approved here, or if that's the case. But in any of that, if it's approved by the planning commission, that means it's a recommendation for approval. And we need to then put together a formal amending ordinance that then will replace the existing language with the new proposed language. And that should be in the document ready to sign by the township board if they approve it, not something prepared later.
Drop my issue.
So, any other questions? So all in favor of recommending the changes to the township board as detailed here and amended? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now, on
So I'm sorry, because we tabled the Article 1307.
Right.
Do we, if we go ahead and make those changes, like I suggested, I think we all agreed to, in paragraph 3, we had to hold another public hearing.
yes.
When that was happening. Because I'm looking on the site right now and I can't find it.
Can't find what?
What you were just saying, the article posting. Yeah,
You said it was online.
yeah, you said it was on the website.
You can't find it on the website?
I might be looking.
No, I trust you.
Ask.
If you can't find it on the website, well then, we will have to have a major discussion with our web manager. Because that would be a second strike against them. No, I did not check to see whether it was there, so I
Just
don't
be
know.
transparent.
And, but I will, Kevin and I will try to find it on there, and hopefully it is, but if it's not, then we will be doing it all over again.
Yeah.
Because I agree that if it's not there, then we need to do this over again.
Yeah.
And so be it. So, yes. sir.
For a point of clarification, we don't have to have a public hearing yet. We already had a public hearing that was posted
Correct,
and then was put in the newspaper.
correct.
So we met those obligations.
Right, but, excuse me, Marty, if this was not on our website, then I assume that this is basically null and void.
Did your notice of the public hearing indicate that the ordinance was available on the website?
Yes,
And if it wasn't, then I'm not comfortable moving forward with
I
it.
agree.
And I would have a renewed public hearing. You're gonna have a public hearing anyways, but perhaps our next meeting with some other things. So I would do it right.
Exactly. Okay, I just want to make, yes. We would have to do it. Thank you, Sharon, for pointing that out, because, you know. So we will verify that, you are correct. And, then we will, and I would like to, I'd like to make a motion that, if this was not posted on our website, that we have a public hearing next, at our next meeting to revisit this. Is there a second for that? Second. Rebecca seconds it. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Okay, just in case. Okay, like I said, we are going to have to have a discussion with our webmaster. Okay, so what's the agenda? Discussion of the township attorney. Okay, and so we invited our township attorney here, so in order that we could take the review, discuss a number of items that have been concerning us. And
So
so,
I have a copy of that list. I'm back and forth.
yes, I do. Marty, one of the things I'd like to bring up is that some of the people have been approached by a representative from DTE. Apparently he was a contractor of DTE regarding deep well injection of CO2. And we are totally confused by because it's DTE, would that be under the Utilities Act where we have absolutely no control? Or should we be scrambling to maybe create an ordinance to control, regulate that?
I have no experience with this. You surprised me with it. First, I've heard of this deep injection of CO2 from propane fired power plants, I believe. My first question would be, we need probably to contact the Michigan Township Association for statewide advice on this. Also, I wonder if Eagle, the environmental, formerly known as DEQ, would be regulating this since they heavily regulate oil and gas installation wells, things like that. So I don't know as if an ordinance is appropriate. Probably anything you do might be preempted by state regulation. So before you step into that arena and try and get educated on all of this, you probably should check with those state agencies and see what they're doing.
Thank you very much. Good advice. Okay, I'm opening this up to planning commission members to ask questions of Marty on any of the items. Yes, Rebecca.
So Marty, I have my questions kind of all broken down into process questions and then I think just general ordinance content. Some of the proposed ordinance content is more since we have a planner moving forward, I think it probably is more apropos for them, but so if so from a process standpoint, where we are now with the ordinance, we have an approved ordinance, and then we have some amendments that we're discussing on the table, and then a moratorium that expires at the end of January. Kind of from your standpoint, what kind of liabilities from a process standpoint, or how from a process standpoint can we avoid liabilities in trying to mitigate if there are major changes to the ordinance that the potential applicant does not support, that we can in order for us to make sure that I'm really not doing a good job of describing this, but I just had what are our liabilities if we change the ordinance without a moratorium?
So you're referring to the township zoning ordinance,
13.
and you're also referring to the large solar energy systems, section 1327 of the zoning ordinance.
Correct.
And when you say, what are our liabilities if we change it? Well, my understanding is because of the moratorium, there is no applications for development of one of these projects in the township hopper. And therefore, there should not be any expectation of financial reward to any applicants. And for the township to ask whether a solar company or developer like Detroit Edison or Atwell or whatever, whoever, to ask if they would agree with the ordinance change. I think it's going way down the wrong road. You don't deal specifically with an applicant. You deal with the township ordinances, the township resources, the zoning of the township, and you're looking to create regulations that are fair and reasonable and have a rational relationship to what you're trying to regulate and the reasons for it. You should not ask or deal with potential applicants because they may be an applicant in the future and there may be 20 other applicants in the future. And you should not focus on one. You should just make straight up regulations if that's what you're inclined to do. And if you change the ordinance, I do not, as long as there's a rational basis for the regulations you're putting in it. I can't guarantee this, but it puts us in a much better position to defend a challenge. Don't know, does that answer your question?
Marty, as she mentioned, the moratorium is due to expire in January. And the township board has a recommendation to repeal the large solar energy system ordinance portion of the ordinance. If they were to repeal it and the moratorium expired or was not extended, I should say, what issues would we be subject to?
Well, if the moratorium expires and there are no large solar energy system regulations in the zoning ordinance, then that means there's no regulations. General, I guess, understanding of municipal ordinances, like a zoning ordinance, you've got a table of permitted uses in this ordinance. Every use has an S or a P or something next to it, meaning it's a permitted use. We call that a permissive ordinance. Therefore, if there's a proposed use or activity that's not permitted, arguably, it's not permitted. So that would be our basis for saying that we don't have any ordinance. A large solar energy system application cannot be accepted because we have no regulations and it is not a permitted use, would be the township's position on that. Of course, that has risks. You can't stop somebody from suing you. And I can't begin to tell you what the chances are, so don't ask me. But I feel comfortable that it's a permissive ordinance and that ideally, you should not put yourself voluntarily in that situation. If you're actively working on an ordinance, some regulations, you should, and you have a good basis for extending the moratorium.
Thank you. Is there a process or a way that we can limit the amount of solar active or renewable energy activity in the township in a legal way? For example, we could specify in the ordinance or that no more than 5,000 acres could be solar, or and 100 acres wind power, or something like that. Is that permissible or allowable, or obviously the numbers pulled out of the air? But in any case, would that be a good strategy to put that in the ordinance, or how would we best manage our township so that we're not inundated by renewable energy projects?
Well, first of all, I do not like hard numbers in an ordinance when you don't have a study or rational basis for it. There was an old case in the city of Detroit when the city of Detroit outlawed adult entertainment businesses within 1,000 feet of a church or a school or something like that. Don't quote me on the details. It's been a long time ago. And if I remember right, the court held against that ordinance because the city of Detroit just picked this arbitrary number of 1,000 feet and didn't have any basis or study to decide that 1,000 feet would shield and have an effect, be an effective shield from the bad effects of an adult entertainment business within 1,000 feet of a school. So the question is, why not 500 feet? Why not 1,500 feet? So that's why we don't like to use hard numbers unless you've got a rational basis for that. Answer to your first question is, yes, there is a way to control the expanse of any kind of use. We don't need to just talk about solar. You do it by zoning, zoning districts. You don't put numbers on it. If you want to limit the area of an activity, then you do it through your zoning ordinance and the districts and the permitted uses in those districts. Some townships have an Ag 1, and an Ag 2, and maybe an Ag 3, or a C1, C2, and I think Milan does. Some townships have an overlay district that allows special uses only in that overlay district. So there's a number of different tools that can be used to limit the size and area of where an activity would be.
So it sounds like the overlay district would be a reasonable way to limit the impact of various uses. Now, large development uses, like the solar or wind, renewables.
I would hesitate to just say that for that particular use, large solar energy systems would be subject to the overlay without other uses also. I guess I'm not prepared to positively say that's a possibility, but I know that the towns of Lambertville and Temperance and Bedford have overlay districts where they allow a more dense commercial activity with lesser setbacks and mixed uses. That's what the overlay district is for there. They don't designate a particular use to be allowed in that overlay district. So I guess I need to be a little careful how far I go with that.
Sure, no problem. And that's what our planner would help us with. Once she's on board, eventually, sometime. Yes.
Marty, so from a process or from the solar ordinance standpoint, our current ordinance, if we were to move towards removing it from Ag 1 and Ag 2, or and putting it in industrial, actually, let me go back. Could we do an overlay ordinance in parts of Ag 1 and Ag 2? So if there was property that we felt, or the township felt as if there would be minimal impact, could you do an overlay district in a particular area? In Ag 1 and Ag 2?
I guess that goes back to my previous discussion that I believe that can be a useful tool. I hate for us to simply focus on large solar energy systems for an overlay district. And I would hope that a planner would be able to help us analyze that question better. Is that right?
No, you mean, so just for clarification purposes, so that, so the overlay district would be more focused on, alternative energy, or do you mean just development purposes?
Mostly development purposes. And the experience I have, it's for an old town center or centers where there's many old non-conforming commercial and mixed uses with residential upstairs and commercial downstairs and multiple uses that are not conforming with the existing ordinance and the permitted uses. So they found it advantageous to not tear those buildings down because they're not conforming, or if they catch fire, they can't be rebuilt. But to create this overlay district to deal with some preferred mixed uses, higher density commercial. So that's the experience I have. Whether it can be applied to this, I guess I'm cautious. Maybe I shouldn't have brought it up.
But it's something we can explore with the plan.
Yeah, I probably, recommend not having some experience with it that, resulted in an eminent domain case. It's definitely not. I mean, I think it's a marty one, it's challenging, super challenging.
Yes.
I'm gonna pivot here.
Okay.
Marty, I don't know if you got my email today. John sent everybody an email about the topics we may want to discuss tonight. And I responded to that email to you and him. As you probably know, several meetings ago, I can't recall the exact date, this commission made a unanimous recommendation to the board to rescind 1327, the original ordinance. We had received some feedback from various sources, the community, and I think within perhaps the board itself, I'm not sure, that perhaps proper procedures were not followed correctly. And the board at their last meeting tabled our motion to rescind. The email that I sent to you today, and again, I apologize for the tardiness of it, kind of laid out why some felt that there was some heartburn in the procedures leading up to us making that motion. If I understand it correctly, it was procedural because of the way things were posted and published and worded. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at that email or had an opportunity to respond.
Well, what we're talking about is I believe the question was there sufficient notice of a public hearing and the details of the topic that was to be taken up at the public hearing? Is that correct?
Well, and again, I've gone over this, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, and I think I get it. Basically, it says the posting says it is to obtain comments about rescinding ordinance 1327. It says nothing about ordinance 1329 because that ordinance has not been informed yet. So the planning commission decided on the wording at the October 11th meeting. So therefore, ordinance 1329 was not even in existence at the time of the publishing of the public hearing. And so if I understand it right, we discussed ordinance 1329, but technically the public hearing was on 1327 because of the way we published it.
Well, your motion was to recommend approval to the township board of rescinding ordinance 1327. That would be, if approved, that would be codified by the new amending ordinance. It would say, we hereby rescind Article 1327. That would be codified in 1329. That's the form and the paperwork that would be created to codify the actual action by the township board to make it an official repeal of 1327. So if there's concern about bad notice, the topic is so simple. It's either repeal 1327 or not repeal 1327. I don't know as if we need to get tied up in form over substance. The substance was clear. Should we repeal 1327 or not? The board has not taken action on that. I really could go either way. If you want to be perfectly by the letter of the process, and the Township Zoning Enabling Act is not explicit on whether or not, to what extent you have to provide exact proposed language for the planning commission to consider at a public hearing, because often, just like the camping ordinance tonight, you notice it up for public hearing, and then you made some proposed, or you're gonna make some proposed changes to the language, well intentioned and with good comments, and you're gonna take that to heart. But does that mean that we have to have a new public hearing every time one word or a phrase is changed? I don't think that's the intent of the statute. The statute doesn't go into those details. So I have really no problem with putting together an ordinance 1329 that simply says repeal of section 1327, large solar energy systems, as written now in the township ordinance, is repealed. And you take it up at a public hearing and take action on it and hand it off to the township board. It really doesn't make any difference. And if you don't do that, I don't think that's a critical defect, because it's a singular question. Should it be repealed or not? It's not a complex thing where we're deciding on setbacks or screenings or zoning. If you were changing the zoning classification where that was a permitted use, like you were eliminating industrial or eliminating ag or something like that, I'd say that's a major change, and you need to put together the proposed language, work on it here, approve it, and then notice it up for public hearing. Does that help?
Okay, so just to try to keep it simple for me. You feel okay with the board, if they so choose to take a vote on 1327? Based on our recommendation.
I feel okay with the board receiving a written proposed ordinance 1329 that says nothing more than exactly what you approved and recommended, nothing more. And then taking action on it. And I see no problem with, or necessarily urgency, if you're having meetings here in the near future, with putting together that same ordinance and having a public hearing on it, and do it without any question of defect.
Okay. Thank you very much.
That's fair.
Yes,
I would note that that ordinance recommendation lies in the lap of the township board,
correct.
and they may very well feel not comfortable moving forward without it being run through the planning commission again. So really, the township board should take some action if it's come back.
Yes, it's in their shop, and they should, they have to decide what they want to do.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a follow-up there. So with the rescinding of the ordinance, John had outlined a pretty long thought process, that they outlined things here. But in, for clarification purposes for the public, and then also for, moving forward, if we move forward as a commission with a, extensive ordinance that allows for solar farms and solar, large solar systems in a, solar farms in a, ag 1 or ag 2, with some additional modifications to the ordinance. Would the, so it would be a 13, so the rescinding would be section 1329, and then our new ordinance would be 1330. How many days after that's approved by the board could there be some type of public referendum, and what would that referendum entail at this point?
Any amendment to the zoning ordinance, whether it be rezoning a piece of property or a text amendment, as approved by the township board, I believe it's 7 days petition or a notice of intent needs to be filed with the township 7 days after the ordinance approval has been published in the local newspaper. And then they have 30 days to garner up enough signatures on a petition to hold a vote, a special election, to let the citizens decide whether that ordinance moves forward or is approved or disapproved.
How many signatures is required?
There's a statement in the law, something based upon so many, a percentage of the signatures in the latest gubernatorial election.
For that particular township?
Yes. So until the vote for a special election is had, any amendment that is subject to that referendum is stayed. In other words, no action can be done to it until, or with it, until the vote is had.
Till the referendum is held. And then if the amendments are made to 1327 to the current ordinance, the only referendum that could be made would be on those said amendments.
Correct. That's why it's important to have an actual proposed amending ordinance typed up and handed to the township board so they know what they're voting on. And as the basis for any referendum after that.
Marty, last meeting, we discussed setbacks for the solar project, and where the setback is defined as from the property line of road right of way to the solar panels. And it was discussed about having 300 feet of setback from all houses. And with the caveat that if the landowner wanted to have a lesser setback because he didn't care, that he could request a lesser setback. And if that request impacted a non-participant neighbor, then that non-participant would have to concur on that request. I guess the concern that I have is that it could easily lead to lots of animosity between neighbors if the landowner wanted to go down to 75 feet and his neighbor said, no way, keep it at 300 feet. But so anyway, how do you feel about allowing people, as well as would it set a precedent where people could throughout the township in effect ignore our setback requirements?
Well, in my opinion, and that's what it is, an opinion, is that you would be going down the wrong road. If you're going to have setbacks, set the setback distance. Don't allow for a waiver or variance or approval from a neighbor. That's going to create a confrontation between neighbors just because of a monetary advantage from one party to the other. I'm sure the applicants, these large solar companies, a little extra money is no problem for them. I don't want the township to get in a position like that. If you want setbacks and you have a rational basis for the setbacks, you should set the setbacks and not allow for a waiver or negotiated difference because then you're missing the point of good planning principles. You should be setting these criteria on good planning principles and not allowing neighbors or applicants to decide to a different standard than what ordinarily is required. I just think it's a dangerous precedent, and I guess I agree with your comments.
Well, you mentioned about the good planning practices for setbacks or reasonable setbacks. I guess how do you have, now this may be more for a question for the planner to provide us with answers, but, what would be considered reasonable setbacks for, for various issues? I mean, I guess what criteria, I obviously, when you have a setback along the property line and the building, you want to be able to have, vehicles, emergency vehicles, be able to go around, go around the buildings. And, but in this particular case, a lot of times setbacks are being, requested because they want them as far away as possible because of visual, issues from the neighbors. So I get, well, my question is, are there criteria? Or should we basically discuss this with the planner?
Yes, it all depends on the proposed use and how intense that use will be, and how preferred or unpreferred and unsightly that use may be. I'm not just talking about large solar systems. I mean, this is across the board for any type of development or standards under special approval. So you have to try and figure out what the even medium of that is that respects the property owner's rights to do this, if it's allowed in that zoning district, and also respects the property rights of the neighbors and the property values of the neighbors. So it's a balancing match. I don't have any numbers for you. Hopefully a planner will help find some of those through other resources. But it is a balancing act, and I don't know if you're going to satisfy everybody. So it's problematic. But I think if you're going to allow 75-foot setbacks, if the parties or the property owner agrees or the neighbor agrees, you might as well just say 75 feet for everything.
Thank you. Yes, Rebecca.
So as the scenario that we're dealing with, I think is that our current ordinance allows for 75 foot setbacks, and not forgetting the other portion of it, but and that was based off of recommendations from other ordinances, as well as a document that was a combination of Michigan State Ag and Extension recommendations. I think that it was not arbitrary when we originally contemplated the ordinance, but that has, based on public comment and then just generally a better understanding of where some of this activity may or may not occur in the township. There's an interest in expanding it to 300 feet for a variety of different purposes, or at a variety of different locations. Is that challenging, or is if we really, there's not, besides a preference that it's farther away, there's not a standard that we're going by. Does that meet kind of what you're talking about, or is it concerning if we just pop in 300 or 500 or something like that?
That would be concerning to me if you just pick 75, 300 or 500 without any research or basis, and it sounds like you've got some. That's good. I would also expect you to look at the adjacent land uses and permitted uses. If there's residentially zoned property next to a proposed installation, it may not have a house yet, but it's surely zoned as a permitted use for a house, and that's its most productive use. And so just because there's not a house there, does that mean that the property owner with a large solar project can encroach closer to the property line, and thus hinder the saleability of that residential parcel for a house? Those are all issues that you need to contemplate. A lot of ordinances just say the setback is so many feet from a differing zoning district. Now, if you're next to an industrial district, I would say the setbacks need not be very much. If you're next to a school, you'd want more setbacks. Schools are primarily in ag zoned areas, so there's a lot of permitted uses in ag zoned areas, including single family residential. Just like residential zoning districts, so it's difficult to try and pick and choose and relate these setbacks to what's an existing use there today, when that use could be different tomorrow or next year, because they're permitted uses, it just hasn't been developed yet. So it's a complex issue.
Next item is, there's been interest expressed about requiring a community benefit in our ordinance, and to basically require the developer to provide some community benefits in terms of either subsidies for various things such as electricity bills or college tuition or whatever. And I was just wondering what your feelings were about having that codified in the ordinance for this large, this ordinance, which basically is written for a large developer.
Can I have a little addition next? You and I, for transparency purposes, since we're at a public meeting, had a few discussions about this, that I know that you've expressed ambivalence, if not total, absolutely not, I guess, recommendations. For background purposes, the thought process came out of what some other cities are doing, specifically the city of Detroit, and was one, it's a pretty prime example, and then just what's really kind of happening on the East Coast related to large solar and wind activities. And it was specifically to your comment, and not your comment, but somewhat what you referenced earlier tonight about property values. And the whole point is if there's going to be a lack of clarity from the federal and state government as to where their intentions are to have these types of energy development facilities in order to meet alternative energy requirements. That there needed to be a community benefit that matched the level of community impact and the impact on property values. And so that is the background as to why we started the community benefit discussion. So I'll just, and I know you're going to say, but go. Taking that.
Well, I appreciate all the considerations and thoughts. I do not believe that, or I do believe that East Coast and the city of Detroit is a long ways from a rural community like Milan Township, which is 90% ag. Community benefit, in my mind, and I've seen that Detroit ordinance. That Detroit ordinance, if I remember right, refers to a large development. Huge development. I don't know if it was industrial or a mixed use, commercial, residential, whatever. Huge development, perhaps in a depressed area. And the city wanted to renew that area. And as part of some of the approvals, the ordinance says you've got to do these things for our community people. I do not like the flavor of that whatsoever. When we're talking about giving perhaps some financial incentive to residents. They may not be property owners, they may be transients that rent or move in and out, or giving scholarships to young children who are not property owners, they're not taxpayers. They are not affected by the solar development as much as their parents, for example. Unless there's some rational basis, those words again, relating to the impact that the development has on the community. I don't know how we sustain an action in court for that. If you feel there's going to be a adverse impact by placing these things in a particular zoning district, and to make it more palatable or acceptable, the company offers some money, I think that's a terrible precedent to set.
So, sorry, Paul. So follow up, the rationale, if the rationale was simply that, that there's an interest in being a part of the ecosystem of generating energy for the general public, and that knowing that you're utilizing ag property to that will no longer be utilized for ag, and that could have an impact on property values. And if the community benefit matched that impact, so it's been clear, the clear rationale is that free college does result in an increase in property values. And it's pretty clear in several communities around the state. That's the rationale. And by the way, I'm kind of arguing this area this. I think my argument's pretty much dead, but I really, I talk about it more from a public policy standpoint and not to keep us here longer. But we are an ag community with the reality of, because I don't agree with you that just because you're ag, you don't you don't reach the levels of sophistication or other types of opportunities that urban or suburban areas can generate. And I think that there can be I don't agree with you related to the fact that a little kid benefit does not benefit their parents. I think that if the parents' property value is impacted, and by the way, this is just my idea on the free education, there's 100 different community benefits aspects that are going on. And the city of Detroit, it's not a large development, it's actually a smaller rationale or a smaller level than this development. I think it's a $1.2 million development, is what they have to meet in depressed areas, correct? But is there legal precedent in the state of Michigan for community benefit?
I would say yes. But my example would be if there's a large industrial site going up.
Sorry.
If there's a large industrial site being developed, or let's say a quarry, aggregate mining. That impact on the community will affect the roads and the infrastructure. That then is a reasonable community concern about what are they going to do to the roads and the transportation system and the rest of the infrastructure. And it makes sense then to require that developer to make improvements to deal with those impacts.
You had mentioned, Rebecca also mentioned property values. I know that we use zoning to try to mitigate property value issues, with prevent mixed uses or drastically different uses near each other, so that property values aren't impacted too much. But to what extent are, within a zoning district, are we, you could say, are we, not required, but are we, I know we try to mitigate issues such as property values or aesthetic values or whatever, but, is there a, how far are we to go to try to protect property values?
Well, changes in zoning and zoning itself always can impact property values. They can increase if your property, investment property gets rezoned to commercial or industrial or something like that. Or they can decrease if your next door neighbor property gets rezoned to industrial or commercial or party store or whatever. So, zoning is always another balancing act. You mitigate the effects by using good planning principles. And if that use is gonna be put in place, a property rezoned, for example, or use allowed in that zoning district, then you minimize the effect by creating reasonable setbacks, screening, things like that, that would impact the neighbors.
Thank you. Glad you brought up screening. One of the aspects of things that we are considering is screening, putting trees and vegetation along the perimeter of the solar project in order to screen, the site from, view from the neighbors, non-participant. So the neighbors and however, there's been a lot of concern that okay, we're going to plant 6 or 8 foot trees, but it's going to take 5 years for them to really produce any kind of screening, that would be effective. But that's the nature of trees. Try to plant 10-foot trees, it's going to be excuse me, from what I understand, 10-foot trees don't live, are much harder to transplant than 8-foot or 6-foot trees. Is there, I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to ask, except that, even though it's going to take 5 years to effectively screen something, is that reasonable? Because our intent is to screen it from the neighbors.
Yes, it all depends on the use that you're screening. How intensive is that use? Are we screening noise? Are we screening sight? What is it we're trying to screen out? Is it something immediate impact where we need maybe a fence until trees mature? All of those things can be considered. And I don't think there's any black and white answer to your question, but everybody has to use common sense, knowing that screening has to mature if it's a live screening planning. But fences also, they need maintenance. And if you don't maintain them, then you got a problem there too. But trees also need maintenance. And if you're planting arborvitaes, they can keel over in the weather too. So it's just a practical balancing act.
Thank you. Does anybody have any additional? I'm done with my questions. So anybody have any additional questions?
At this time.
Yep.
You know that every meeting, Marty.
Is the Inquisition over?
Yes. So, excellent. Well, thank you, Marty. I think you had some very meaningful and productive discussions. Okay, it's after 9 o'clock, and rather than get into anything that our next agenda item, I think we pretty much have a lot to digest. So I would like to open this up to public comment. Mr. President, Chair.
All right, just want to let you guys know that you need to look at, revisit your map. Here we have nine townships that are in commercial and or industrial. We have 500 feet, this is all from the property line, 500 feet from Ravenville, 250 from Erie, and LaSalle is 500 feet from property line. So that should give you a little bit of a roundabout way of going about this and where we need to be. The lawyer even stated that. So it's just a little bit of more information for you guys, just to review.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Again, just to remind you folks, I offered, asked an invite to folks to stop by my place to see for yourself. I have 1 acre that's going to be decimated, surrounded on 3 sides by this proposed development. And hearing it from my lips is just not good enough. I really, truly invite you. Remember, I'll offer you a cup of coffee as well. To come by and see what it would actually do, real life, real time, in a real place in this township. That invite still stands for all of you.
Why don't you send me an email with your address?
I will do that, sir.
And then I'll pass it out to the board members as well as the planning commission members.
And it'd be great to do it at the email, right? Or phone number, just so we can.
I'll send you it all.
Thank you.
Do donuts go along with the coffee?
Pardon?
Are donuts available with the coffee?
If that's what it takes, absolutely.
Hold up, we all have beer.
Again, I was gonna say it anyway, Sharon beat me to it. The high standard, the precedent has indeed been set. The area communities have spoken. Again, I really think the heavy lifting's been done for you folks, by and large. The model, the template is there. Again, high standard has been met, the precedence has been made. 500-foot setbacks from the property line and industrial only, no ag 1, no ag 2. And you'll have a happy community and any happy development. It will exist in blissful happiness.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Tim.
Yes, I want to like, first of all, thank Marty for coming because it means a lot to me. If you're gonna that he's here to answer questions for you guys as well. We get a chance if we ever do get a chance to speak with them, but another thing he said that you guys really need to keep in mind is what's best for your residents. What's the best for your residents? Remember that. And the other thing, and I'm not picking on you, John, but do not, he's already said it, do not listen to Apex. Do not take their recommendations. Over, they're fine with 300 feet setback. No, that's what they want. What we want, we're the residents. That's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I heard a lot of questions about protecting the township from exposure to liability or lawsuits or future issues with applicants if they submit something under whatever ordinance you have in effect at the time. The best way to protect yourself from lawsuits is to extend the moratorium. If the moratorium expires and there's ambiguity and confusion about what the state of the ordinance is, that is open season. And whether it's angry person already living in the community or a potential developer or an applicant, without that moratorium, the township is really exposed. And so because that ordinance was not even discussed today, the proposed ordinance, that's an agenda item on your agenda this afternoon. And I'm hearing, personal conflicts with meeting dates, and there's been 4 or 5 meetings where this was discussed. That ordinance is not going to be done by the end of January. The planning person's going to need some time. Everyone's going to need to work together to get something that satisfies everyone. And so really requesting an extension of the moratorium would be a very conservative and appropriate thing for this commission to reach that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, yes, sir.
Nick Stroud, Milan Township. Today, when you guys are discussing camping and the ordinance there and allowing it as special use. Marty stated that you can't just not approve the special use if they meet all the recommendations or all the items in the zone. If that's correct, the way I heard it. And you said it could go into all commercial. So my concern and what I got out of it, this ordinance that you guys have is allowing this zoning, the energy system, large solar energy system as a special use approval in Ag 1 and Ag 2. So then does that mean that opens up 19 to 20,000 acres of ag land as long as they meet what's in the zone? That's very concerning. If I'm right, that's what Marty stated. So this special use idea is going to backfire, and we're going to end up with 20,000 acres of zone. Or that's scary. So I don't think the special use approach is the right approach.
Well, that's why there was a question about how we can limit the impact of solar projects in the township or renewable energy projects in the township or any large project development within the township. And that's we will be exploring.
Yeah, I think it's imperative that this zoning ordinance gets repealed and rewritten to where it can limit at a minimum, get it out of ag and limit where you're going to put it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Loretta.
David Kaminsky is London's planner / engineer, and he was at Monday night's meeting. And I didn't know he was also your engineer. Why isn't he your planner also? Why are you looking for a planner if you already got a planner / engineer?
He's not our engineer. We have used him for a couple of things, but he is not on the chain or anything like that.
Oh, do you have an engineer?
We do not have an engineer at this time.
Wait, you need one.
We probably do, yes.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Just to let everybody know, these solar guys, I'm involved in like 3 different projects already. And they lie, and I can prove a lot of it, okay? I got into it last night. And the other thing is your 75-foot area. The 75-foot in some of these solar areas also don't take in the driveway. So they can bring the driveway right up to your property line, but put the fence 75 foot away. So you can drive through the whole area. And we brought that up, said, no, that's supposed to go behind the fence. We're all on there, that's the way it is. So there's another one that they did now. So they add the driveway in because it's another way of doing things, and they think that does not, it's strictly the fence to the solar. So you don't have 75. So I just let you know that, and they said that was fine. And then in one meeting we had, the solar people were there, and lawyers, we had lawyers, all kinds of lawyers and stuff. And we asked the one question, and said, now when you get this bill, who maintains it? And the solar guy, he looked around the room for a minute trying to get an answer, and he finally said, we are working with consumers, and consumers take it over after we build it. So they have nothing to do with it, they're gone. So like all this maintaining it and so on and so forth, you need to start looking at all these areas that we're trying to get into and go to their meetings that explore it. And that's what gets me so upset is that We gotta have fact. Transparency, what they're saying, truth. If you're working for us, as you are voted in, then you should be looking out for us and listening. And at every township I've been in, it's 100 people against and 5 or 6 for. Everyone, every stinking one. And so it's how they do it. And then when you catch them in lies, it's like a tail end where it's getting really rough, where you make it or not, and you know, how you're gonna do it. But take that into consideration on your border, you know, that's another part of it, and that they'll sneak in, and stuff that they say in these meetings, I was a professional at one time, and they get up and they can walk around the bush and tell you everything that's this, and talk about their grandmother and everything else, and never once answer your question. A guy asked about watershed, the guy never got his answer, so I answered it for him. And they said, where did you get this? And I said, I used to put it in solar, I know what it's I'm talking about. And I said, not this type of solar, but different. And I said, watershed is up here, underground, all this, and it goes in the ground. The panels that are there, you get 14 foot of watershed in one spot. You got a flood, it's running downhill, uphill, and everything else. That's why they gotta have flat ground. Farm ground, so they don't have to do it. So there's so many different things you look at and understand this stuff. And the more I get around the different, because guess what? I'm retired now, so I can go around these areas. And you get involved in it and you listen to it, you find out more and more what the solar company is and the energy company. Those are the two things. And one drops and the other one takes over, and then you try to get it done through consumers or GE, whoever. You're not gonna get nothing done. In the trees and shrubs that you're talking, they ain't gonna happen. Unless you're gonna pay for it. So, because they're done with it after they get the solar. So, you gotta have it already, like this one guy that he's all worried about his house flooding, gonna get his lawyer, get in rain, they're subject to any damages to your house. And that, and our lawyer down, or the other lawyer down there I talked to, he said, you're right, he said, because that individual that's going around his house, that shed is gonna come in there and it's gonna flood his house. Got proof of that over on Hendershot Road. Hendershot Road, Jeff Road, he'll tell you flat out. Lost $30,000 on his house, and I'm getting ready to lose almost $40,000 on a house I'm getting ready to sell, what I have in the market. Because it went from here to here when solar. So you lose all the kind of money in your house, damages, the things you gotta look at, and the farther you get the panels away, the better off.
15 seconds.
15 seconds. So, maybe, 50, is that 30 acres that you're talking about on the lake for like, what do you call that thing like?
Campground requires 30 acres. The 39 acre, Callaway Bay is 39 acres.
Is it counting the water or is it counting just 39 full dirt acres?
I believe it counts the water. Yes, it does count the water.
Yeah.
It's the acre and the length is 5 acres.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we was getting it right, because what, I bet I was right close to it, and I know Kevin.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Kimberly Road. All the good points have been made this evening. The one thing that I am just mystified by is why in the hell are we doing this? I have been coming to meetings and I have been listening and I can see on the map who the property owners are that are going to receive a benefit. And I can see on the map who the neighbors that I have, country neighbors, distances away, that are going to have this hindering of saleability and increased property values. And for the life of me, I just don't see why you tread into this. You know, we live in an area that has low taxes, low service. I have a dirt road. I have to work on my cars a little more. I have to dig my own well. I have my own septic. I pay for my own garbage. I like living like that. It's how we live out here. Anybody else want to change their lifestyle for a community benefit? Anybody in here want to keep things how they are? Yeah.
Please answer comments to us.
No, I just want you to understand the magnitude of this. It's crazy. I really appreciate Mr. Camper being here tonight because it's actually the first productive meeting I've seen since the last time he was here. And it's just a lot of spinning and confusion and asking the lawyer what he thinks the setback should be when that's kind of a planner question. Just really clarifies to me, like, wow, what, and we're gonna give our township open to this kind of development. With all of this like uncertainty, lack of research, confusion, and limited reward to a handful. That is just wrong, does not go with our master plan. I am not gonna stop coming and I am not gonna stop pushing. Till I feel like our leaders here are accountable to my neighbors.
Thank you. And the reason why we're doing this is because we have to go through a process. We are required to go through a process, and that's unfortunately taking forever. So,
Yeah.
anyway, so, because we would prefer to do something else as well. So, anyway,
Do that something.
I got one quick question, please.
He's already talked.
you already talked.
I didn't get 2 minutes, but
Doesn't matter.
I'm sorry, no, you already had your question.
I give him back 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, so.
No, I can't.
so-
Read your red book.
Sorry, Tim. That's the rules. Since he already talked, he can't give him what?
You get 2 minutes.
Doesn't matter.
You can ask us, talk to us after the meeting. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Thank you very much. Okay,
Industrial 500.
so,
Property line. Look at the map.
our next meeting is December 6th. Is there? I make a motion to the adjourn. Second, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. 9-1.